Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to go over my thoughts about the open letter American Senator Bernie Sanders wrote in the aftermath of Trump's second and more emphatic victory, and how the response from the top of the Democrats' campaign tells us quite a bit about why they lost, beyond the accusation in Sanders' letter. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, Democrats, they didn't just lose, did they? They were battered. Recriminations and defences all round, of course, egos bruised, and it's easy for any individual connected with the campaign to throw blame around elsewhere because there are lots of possible factors which may have contributed to this, and it's way too early for any analysis to be able to show which ones were relevant and by how much. But there is one iron law of elections where candidates are not impeded and the public are free to vote for their choice, which is mostly the United States. The campaign that loses got it wrong, and they should adopt a bit of a sense of humility. The other night, UK time anyway, Bernie Sanders tweeted out an open letter about his thoughts. He did not hold back. He put his focus on the fact that Democrats had abandoned the working class. He said he specifically cited wealth inequality, the fact that average wages were in real terms lower than 50 years ago, that young people have a lower standard of living than their parents, that the US is the only wealthy nation not to guarantee healthcare for all, and that they pay the highest price in the world by far for prescription drugs. Now, I could argue a couple of points on that in terms of context, but beyond a couple of bits not necessarily being helpful, I don't think wrong, just not helpful. When you consider what Sanders has been arguing for basically a decade now, what he's getting at is that the Democrats are not addressing the core concerns of ordinary voters. Trump did. Trump won't deliver. He'll make it worse. But he promised to make things better in very specific ways, and the Democrats did not. But hang on, complained the chair of the Democrat Party, Jame Harrison, with a bit of colourful language. He said of Biden's work in government, well, yeah, he saved union pensions, created millions of well-paid jobs, even marched on a picket line. Of Harris's campaign, he said, there was the child tax credits, down payment for homes, Medicare for senior health care. And you go, okay, well, let's go over this. First of all, Biden absolutely did improve things for people. I was quite impressed. I'd said so. But there are three problems with bringing this up as a defence for the losing campaign. The first is that none of those things address the perceived standard of living for all voters. Some voters would have benefited only. What about the rest? If you can't name something that benefited all target voters, you've already lost the argument. Second, those things are in the past. So even those voters who benefited and recognise they benefited, because that's not all the same thing, just because you get a new job, you don't necessarily know that it's Uncle Biden's work. So let's say you benefited and you recognise that you benefited. You can take it for granted now. You have it. It's like, okay, you've given me that. Thank you very much. That's why I voted for you last time. What are you going to do for me next? It's an election when voters are interested in what you're going to do next. That's it. Not what you have done. Now, you want to plug a record. Of course you do. But your record only has the power to demonstrate you can deliver. It has to sit alongside your future offer. Third problem, Joe Biden's not running. And Harris deliberately distanced herself from Biden during the campaign, for good reasons in many ways. But it did therefore render that government record largely null and void. However, Harrison also cited Harris's policies. Now, first of all, I'm not an American. I don't really know which messages were hitting the public and which weren't. It's all right having policies. Did the public know about them? What I can say is I listened to the debate and I listened to some of her rally speeches. And I'd said this before, Harris seemed to avoid talking like policies like the plague, which I thought, well, maybe she'll get away with it with Trump largely not wanting to focus on policies. But then Trump did mention some. I mean, she had policies. I'm not doubting she had policies, but I'm skeptical how many of them made it to the wider public. That section of the public who don't really follow politics closely. How many of them knew what those policies were? Because I saw polling before the election that suggested that some of Harris's popular policies, people thought they were Trump's policies. I talk about Labour comms being quite bad at times. The Democrats had billions of dollars to spend. They had so much money to spend. They were opening an office in Florida where they were not realistically likely to win. Why weren't they spending it on better communications? Anyway, her entire election campaign, as far as I can tell, was, I'm normal, Trump's a dangerous weirdo. And this is true. And do you know what? If I was an American, that would be a good enough reason for me to vote Harris, right? But it evidently wasn't good enough for a good 15 million Americans who voted for Biden last time and did not vote for Harris this time. I mean, let's look at these policies again. Child tax credits, that's good. That's a good one. That would benefit a lot of Americans. So if the message was being hammered, and I don't know whether it was, I've no reason to suggest that that was not a good policy, not just to have, but also to push. You would absolutely push that. Down payments for homes doesn't work for existing homeowners or those who still cannot afford their own place, even with this policy. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad policy, but it only helps so many. And the rest may wonder if they're paying the bill so that others can benefit. Like you notice at the moment, in terms of Labour's policy of getting more people onto the housing ladder, none of it requires other taxpayers to pay for it. As for anything related to healthcare, yeah, it's crap in America. Any improvement is good. But most people that Harris needs to target, I mean, first of all, you know, if you're largely fit and healthy, you don't really think about healthcare on a daily basis. And this specific policy, it seemed to me that it's not going to help most of her target voters either, at least not in the medium term. So what do voters think about? It's no mystery. Polling has made it loud and clear for what, about 2 years now? In fact, it's what is always the top priority for everyone in any democracy anywhere in the world. Cost of living. Their everyday life. That's it. The other people that aren't interested in politics and they don't care about your arguments about this political idea or that political idea. They just want the government to make their life easier. Cost of living is of primary importance. It's the day-to-day importance, right? As a result of COVID and the war in Ukraine, inflation spiked. Not as badly as in the UK, where we threw Liz Truss and Brexit on top for a real battering of living standards, but it still went up, and it went up noticeably as it did around the world. And when polling was showing that the particular aspect of that cost of living that Americans prioritised was the cost of gas, as in petrol and diesel, that should have been a huge red flag to do something about it. You know, take what happened in the UK at the same time, for example. I said, even given that Sunak was a Tory, I thought he was insane that to allow energy prices to keep hitting people's living standards like he did. I said at the time, I know it's not a very Tory thing to do, but he should have slapped the windfall taxes on oil companies properly, used the money to subsidise the cost of energy to keep it low in a cynical way to try and get votes, and then he could have, you know, gone back to being a Tory after the election if he won. The cost of living was the number one issue in the UK and he ignored it. He allowed it to get worse, in fact. Now, as I say, this is the Conservative instinct. Sunak would have had to act against his political nature to do something about it. What was Biden's excuse? Why didn't he levy some tax on something unpopular, amongst Democrat voters anyway, and use it to reduce federal fuel duties to compensate? And then make a big song and dance about doing so. Not just do it, but go, I've done this to help you guys, right? That this is an external thing. This is to do with Putin the nutter and, you know, and COVID. We're recovering from that. But I have done this to help you. Because I remember Rachel Reeves presented her budget to Parliament last week. And she didn't just say she wasn't going to put up fuel duty because it was expected that fuel duty would be going up. She said, no. So she made a point of saying, I'm not doing that. But she specifically said she was making this decision in order to keep costs down for ordinary people. So it wasn't just, oh yeah, I've juggled the figures and I've just made this decision for whatever reason. No, I've done this for you. That's what she was saying. I've done this for you because you've suffered enough. Do a thing to help, then shout it from the rooftop so everyone gets the message. But Biden didn't. Not that it's all Biden's fault, as if Harris had no agency. I don't just mean as vice president. I mean, she was going to distance herself a little from Biden anyway. So why didn't she promise to do something like this? Say, okay, well, this is one of the areas where we went wrong. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. As I say, they managed the economy well. But she could say, because Americans were going, cost of fuel, cost of fuel, cost of fuel. So she said, okay, well, we've not handled that well. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I am going to do. So, because in one sense, you had it easy. Polling didn't just show that it was the cost of living that there was number one concern. I mean, you know, as it would have been for many, it showed the price of fuel was their issue. I'm sorry, but a campaign which does not have as its core election promise something that addresses the number one concern of voters deserves to lose. And anyone involved in the decision making of the strategic direction of that campaign at the very top should shut up and show a bit of humility. You don't automatically have to agree with everything Sanders said, or even any of it. But anyone directly involved in the strategic decisions of this Democrat campaign should not be responding like Harrison did. You know, they can say, well, let's look at the post-mortem before we go jump into conclusions, if you like, because it will be important that the Democrats spend some of that money that they raised. They raised a lot of money to carry out a full investigation, have it properly analysed, base their conclusions on that analysis. No knee-jerk reactions. But there are two things which are definitely true, because these things are always true in every election. First, if you do not push a message of how you're going to address the top concerns of your voters, you are running a bad campaign. You might still win, because the other campaign could be worse, but your campaign is still bad. Second, if you lose and your candidates were free to campaign and the public were free to vote, which isn't the case in all democracies, but it is sort of true in America. It's not ideal, but it is sort of still true, at least for now. If under those circumstances you lose, you deserve to lose. Like a few years ago, Keir Starmer said this: when you lose an election in a democracy, you deserve to. You don't look at the electorate and ask them, what were you thinking? You look at yourself and ask, what were you doing? And I've said myself, this election loss is on voters as well as Harris this time. Usually I just blame the losing campaign. In this case, I'm referring to those who were eligible to vote but chose not to vote. And specifically in swing states. I mean, if you sat at home in New York or something, okay, whatever. I'm not blaming Trump voters, because they voted for something. It's the Democrats' fault that they didn't tailor their campaign to win anyone who voted for Trump that might have voted for the Democrats. That's the Democrats' fault. But non-voters, they chose to allow Trump back in. This election wasn't a normal election. It wasn't one party against another. And it's like, well, I don't like either party, I won't vote. I mean, you know, I'd still say you should vote, but okay, on those circumstances, you know. But that's not what this was about this year. It was a politician with respect for the rule of law and her own country against a self-centered, moronic, rapidly degenerating, raping, thieving, megalomaniacal monster. But the Democrats are still chiefly to blame. Not just the chair, not just Harris, not just Biden. Everyone who had their hands on the levers of Democrat activity and strategy over the past 2 years. That includes those who saw inflation being an issue, a top issue, and went, it's not our fault, let's do nothing about it. As well as those who ignored it during the campaign itself. Only Waltz gets a pass. He was cool, did his best. I see no reason why any of this is his fault. But everyone else needs to take their share of the blame, not get defensive. Otherwise, the party that has learned no lessons since the end of the Obama period is still not going to learn lessons now. And it could be argued they weren't even any better with Obama. He was just an aberration that covered up their weaknesses. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.